Good evening and welcome. Let's start with our big story this hour. It could take days before the authorities announce the winner. For now, American voters are trying to make sense of the post-election scenarios through opinion polls. A final national poll conducted by Reuters shows Joe Biden with an outright majority of 52% of voters who say they favor Joe Biden. On the other hand, Donald Trump is trailing behind with only 44% of the voters saying that they support him. In the battleground state of Florida, Biden has attained a 4 percentage point lead. Just last week, Biden was leading the way in the state by a smaller margin of 2 percentage points. Now, the two candidates are statistically tied in the battleground state of Arizona. Last week, Biden was leading in the state by 2 percentage points. The trend remains the same day before the election. Opinion polls in the battleground state of North Carolina also show a tie between the two candidates. Joe Biden is leading by 1 percentage point. President Trump seems to be trailing by a wide margin in Michigan. Biden is leading by 10 percentage points, a gap that looks difficult for Donald Trump to cover just one day before the election. Opinion polls show Joe Biden leading in one of the most crucial states, Pennsylvania. Biden is leading by 7 percentage points. Now, last week, he was leading by 5 percentage points. The two candidates and their running mates have held multiple rallies in Pennsylvania as they compete for the state's 20 electoral votes. WION correspondent Sarah Walton is joining us live from Florida. Welcome. Thank you for being with us. Now, 52% of the voters say that they favor Joe Biden. On the other hand, Donald Trump has 44 percentage votes. From the Reuters poll, voters supporting him. Where you are in the battleground state of Florida, Biden has a 4 percentage point lead. Where are we at?
Well, you say Biden has a 4 percentage point lead in the opinion polls, but, you know, all opinion polls come with a margin of error, and really a 4-point lead is pretty much within that margin of error. It is all really still to play for here in Florida, a key state that all presidential candidates on the way to the White House want to get their hands on because it comes with a large number of electoral votes, 29 electoral votes. And we are seeing some interesting signs from early voting here. Americans have had several days now over the last weeks or so where they could cast their vote early in person and also via mail. Many mail-in ballots this year being sent in by people who are concerned with the coronavirus pandemic and don't want to come out in public. But what we're seeing from those figures is that the number of Democrats casting their votes and the number of Republicans is almost equal. There's about 100,000 votes in it, which really is not a lot. And that is interesting because studies have shown that it's Democrats that are far more likely to vote earlier and Republicans that are more likely to show up on the final election day, which is today, Tuesday, here in the United States. Now, if that large turnout by Republican Trump supporters does happen today, on top of the early voting, I mean, that is a sign, perhaps, that Florida could be leaning towards electing Donald Trump again. It's still very early, and of course, a big caveat here is that looking at early voting numbers is a bit like reading tea leaves. Just because somebody has registered their affiliation with a party in the past doesn't mean they are going to vote that way this time round. So, as I say, still all here to play for here. Lots of questions. We'll hopefully start getting some answers in Florida once the polls close this evening.
Absolutely. And Sarah, we know that it could take days before the authorities announce a winner, especially considering all the early record numbers of early mail-in voting. What are we expecting following this?
So this is a really interesting one, and you're going to get a wide variation across the United States. Here in Florida, you mentioned those postal ballots. Postal ballots can take longer to count because you have to open an envelope, you have to check the signature on it. It's a time-consuming thing. And in some states, they won't be counting those until the day after Election Day. In Florida, they actually have a long history of using postal ballots here. They have a large older community people who are less mobile like to send their vote in via post rather than having to go to a polling station. And so here in Florida, they're going to be counting them very quickly. They've actually already been tabulating them via a computer, so we will get the figure from the postal ballot very quickly. To that, they will add the number of postal ballots that have been cast in person over the weeks and today. So Florida is actually one of the places where we are likely to get a result on election night early into the following morning. The delay to that could come if it is very, very close, if some counties have to go to a recount. But Florida, a good place to watch for an early indication of what is happening, perhaps on a national level. Where we could see a delay is if states like Florida elect Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is relying on many of the swing states for the electoral college votes that he will need, and we have to watch a state like Pennsylvania, for example, where they won't be counting their postal votes until tomorrow here in the US. That is when we could see the final winner of the White House, the announcement of the next president of the United States, being delayed into the following day, potentially longer if there are then legal challenges that Donald Trump has threatened he would bring.
Absolutely. It's all to watch and all to play for at the moment. Thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us. Now, India's former permanent representative at the United Nations, Syed Akbaruddin, joins us for more perspective on the elections. Thank you for your time this evening. Now, Election Day is here, and this has been termed as the most divisive election. Two very different candidates with two very different schools of thought and two very different approaches. Some of the big issues facing the U.S. at the moment. What are your views?
Well, it's been a polarizing campaign, perhaps the most divisive in recent history. A campaign amidst a pandemic which has already claimed more than 230,000 human lives. A campaign in which many fault lines of democracy that you associate with emerging democracies were visible in the world's oldest democracy. A campaign which was racked by anti-racism protests for a long time. A campaign in which there were even a foiled attempt at kidnapping a governor. Also a campaign in which the incumbent president has cast aspersions on the electoral process itself. Obviously, all these have taken a toll, even on the most mature of democracies. So what we are seeing is an anxiety, a concern of a type that we haven't seen in US elections before. Early voting is one manifestation of that. As you mentioned, more than 100 million voters, which translates, if we take into account last time's voting, it would translate into something like 73%. But there are other signs of anxiety which are cropping up. For example, social media platforms are coming up with new procedures to announce results. There are also sporadic concerns all across the US cities about possible acts of violence. These are all unprecedented for a US election campaign, and that's what is causing unprecedented interest in the United States as well as globally, because what happens in the US election is of interest to everybody all across the world.
Right. Now, there have been a couple of main topics, big topics in the run-up to these elections. Just some of them: the coronavirus, the economy, the Black Lives Matter protests. These are all things you have touched on. Take us through how the two candidates have dealt with these issues, and according to their different personas and personalities, their leadership styles, how they would deal with these issues if elected.
So, every big issue, and you could list, say, about half a dozen to a dozen big issues, both the candidates have brought to bear very different perspectives. For example, how to handle the pandemic. On the one hand, you have Vice President Biden saying that he will go by the science. On the other hand, you have President Trump, who says we have to open up the economy, and that's his primary concern. You look at the economic platforms. Vice President Biden wants to bring down corporate taxes from the increase the corporate taxes from the 21% that they are now to 28%. President Trump touts that as one of his big achievements of having brought down corporate taxes. Healthcare, there is again a divergence of views. Similarly, how do you address foreign policy challenges? Again, there is a clear division between how the Republicans see it and how the Democrats perceive it. Even issues such as social media regulation. Should there be more of it? Should there be less of it? Immigration, climate change, environment, energy. You take every one of these issues, there is a clear distinction. So the choice is pretty clear. If you go by issues, you have clear choices to make. Alternatively, you can also go by personalities. You can consider the present election as a referendum on President Trump himself. His outsized personality, his impact on his administration in ways that few presidents have had previously, makes this perhaps a referendum on whether you want 4 more years of this or you want an alternate model. On all these cases, the choices are pretty clear for the voters to decide.
Absolutely. And we see across the United States, people are bracing for potential trouble on the streets in case of a disputed result. Now, especially at a time where there has been high racial tension in the U.S., what is your view of the two candidates here?
Yes, this is unusual for a U.S. election to end up in a process that may lead to some form of violence. It's perhaps unknown in recent times. But that said, it's just a reflection of the polarizing nature of this campaign, the division that the United States is witnessing. And some of it may spill over, and that's the concern. Of course, as a mature democracy, we hope that the United States and its institutions have the ability to tide over what is certainly amongst the most difficult periods that they have confronted.
Syed Akbaruddin, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you very much.